back. Today we're talking about the final season of Insecure, episode 2. And I think it is true that comparison is indeed the enemy. So it seems like Molly and Issa are back on good terms. So they're pretty much friends with new boundaries, it feels like. And Molly is getting her groove back, whereas Issa looks like she has totally lost her groove. And the way they kind of illustrate this is by redoing that block party from hell. So if you remember the last time they threw a block party, yes, Issa it gave her the opportunity she needed to kind of build her business. Unfortunately, she also lost her best friend Molly. And I like how the episode starts because it shows us the amount of work that kind of went into this day. And we are at that day, right? So it seems like Issa has been working on this for 6 months. And everything changed, but Molly and Issa remained the same, right? And I love that little picture of them because their friendship is so strong that at the end of the day, they can't really discard it, you know? And even the way they start their days, right? So Issa wakes up and she just looks like she's getting through her day. Molly wakes up and she is just horny, you know, she's doing well at work. She has that kind of go-getter attitude. And so watching Issa lose her groove was quite disheartening. So this episode we're focused on Issa's grind, right? So it's been 6 months and the pressures of being an entrepreneur is starting to get to her because in the last episode she felt like a failure. She said that she still drives Lyft, like she's not where she wants to be. And I think that's in comparison to the people around her because a year ago she would have killed to be in the spot that she's in now. However, she's kind of feeling like the glass is half empty. And this sort of attitude, pretty much, she doesn't trust her gut instinct anymore. And it's starting to show, right? And you see this in kind of how she's finalizing her block party. And even her attitude, her clothes, her demeanor, it's totally changed, right? So watching her in these meetings is really interesting because a part of you is like, yes, Issa, like you're doing it. And then a part of you is like, why are you dressed that way? So she's in this meeting and this meeting illuminated a lot of things. So she's trying to get funding to throw this block party, but also, you know, back this artist that she really respects, this designer. And ultimately her priority should be backing the artist or designer, right? Like it's that tough balance of trying to find like authenticity and, you know, like being realistic, but also not being a sellout. And sadly for Issa, she kind of failed at balancing either one. Watching her in this meeting, she's wearing a suit. She's really like pitching herself. And they kind of come up to her and they tell her, listen, we love your idea. We would love to support you, but you need to change pretty much everything, starting with that artist of yours. So this artist that she's backing was a former inmate turned designer, and she seems to really back him. And in the beginning, she's doing what Issa does, right? So she's really kind of going in on him. She's like, you know what, this guy, he's the best. It's what you want. You just have to trust me. But that kind of ego kicks in, right? Because in the back of her mind, you know, she feels like she made it. And I think sadly for Issa, she lost sight of her priorities because in her mind, networking with these companies was more important than networking with the artist that, you know, she's tried desperately to kind of connect with and build this very unique network of people that is the thing that actually makes her special. Okay, so she kind of takes their advice and she goes over to Molly to get a second opinion. And the fact that she needed Molly's second opinion was kind of a red flag because these block parties are kind of Issa's thing, right? Like she kind of knows what to do, but she doesn't know where to go. So she kind of like asks Molly, who is very corporate, what to do, right? And just before she goes over to Molly's place, she's talking to Nathan. And this conversation with Nathan was so awkward. Like, I think she was like, carpe diem. Like, I think there's a certain age where you just don't know what you're saying anymore. Like, you're just saying shit to say shit, and it shows. Like, there are times where I've used sayings and people are like, that's not what that means. So she asks Molly, and Molly basically suggests that she should go over his head. You know, kind of go to the boss, the main boss, and see if you can get the green light for the artist. And this is already a red flag because in Molly's world, this is appropriate. You know what I mean? Like, it's very cutthroat. People kind of want what they want. But in Issa's world, it's not that deep. It's not that deep that you need to be going over people's heads, right? So this was already a red flag, and this is something that she should have recognized right away. And of course, she takes Molly's advice, and it's a disaster, right? So she gets to breakfast, and this breakfast was so awkward. As soon as that third plate went down, I was like, Issa, what are you doing? So she tried to go behind this guy's back, and she ends up kind of like you know, she's in survival mode, right? So she's desperately trying to get this artist booked. And by the skin of her teeth, she's able to convince these two people from the startup that, like, listen, this is the right decision. And I promise you, nothing will go wrong. And so they kind of accept Issa's proposal under the condition that they take a few notes, right? A few notes. And we didn't, I mean, there's kind of suggesting things and then changing things, right? So the notes that they gave Issa were not notes, right? Like, these were just kind of like, we want a totally different vibe than the vibe that you're presenting us. So Issa takes these notes and then she goes up to her artist with these notes, Crenshaw, I believe. And this is just a total disaster. And the way Issa was talking to him was so condescending, right? She kept saying, listen, I'm doing you a favor. It's what they want. Sometimes you have to play the game. Like, he's not signing a record deal. Like, it's not that deep, girl. Like, she's kind of really pitching it to him like, this is your only opportunity to make it. And he's kind of looking at her like, this is a block party. Like, it's not, I mean, what you're, like, we're on totally different pages. And she's approaching him like an agent, you know what I mean? Like, you need to do this, you need to do that, it's for you. And again, you get that desperation from Issa where she really feels like she has something to prove. And her idea of success is impressing these sort of company people and no longer herself, right? Like, it's not about like that self-satisfaction anymore. It's more about that like external validation, which is what ends up, you know, killing her at the end. Before we talk about the block party, I just want to talk about Molly for a second. And Molly was very impressive this episode. Like, she's clearly done the work. She's really like taking initiative, right? Like, you see her at her work meeting. She's like, yeah, I'll do it, you know. And a few seasons we've seen her complain about not being valued, not being, you know, this and that. So it seems like she's taken a more active role in her life. She's dating, she's waking up horny, which is always a good sign. And I think one of the best scenes was when she's on this dating app and she gets flashbacks from like all her previous like romantic encounters and the kind of like hypocrisy of all of it. And it's funny because there's what we want and then there's what we actually do. And Molly was kind of looking back like, she doesn't want to repeat the past, right? So she's very much aware of her mistakes and she wants to move forward with like good intentions. And I think that's true for anyone with like a dating past, right? Like, some of the people you look back on, you're like, who was I? What was I doing? You know, it's so contradictory to the things you are, especially like sometimes there could be a big difference between the things we say we want and then what we actually want or the things we actually end up doing. And so I think Molly's realizing like, she needs to decrease the discrepancy between these sort of things. And so the flashback scene was really awesome. And again, you're seeing progress. She even apologizes to her parents for being like harsh on them for not finishing something about their house that she told them to finish. And so Molly's communicating her feelings, which is really awesome. She's not keeping it bottled up. And I think it's hard for personalities like that because I'm a personality like that where you just keep it inside, you know, and you're like, I'll just deal with it. And the problem is it manifests in different ways, right? Like, you might not explode, you might not look like you're pissed off, but you're pissed off. So I think Molly is better at asking for help, better at sort of reaching out about her feelings and not feeling like she's bothering anyone about anything. And just a side note about Molly, these scenes with her sort of past, you know, love interests that coming back, like last episode we had the guy from college, this episode we have this guy Herbert, and I think he was like he remixes trap songs for the Lord or something. I mean, there was some funny writing in this, like I was dead. And there was this one, I guess the guy he photographs very old, like he's a very young man, and she shows Issa his picture and Issa was like, oh, his father's really good looking, but where is he? And I just died because like it was just so cringeworthy, and like the guy isn't even that old. That was the sad part. But anyways, like watching these guys kind of come into Molly's sort of like circle again, like these guys from her past, I think it's to indicate that she's more aware of what she wants and she's kind of going after it. With that being said, we're going to talk about this block party, and the vibe of the block party is a lot different, right? Because if we remember the last block party, there was kind of a chaotic energy to it. Like, people were like, there was just like a lot going on, whereas this block party feels very corporate. Molly and Issa were on totally different pages. Like, Molly showed up for a block party, you know, and Issa just grabbed her water. She's like, girl, what are you doing? We don't do Dasani here. She's wearing like a blazer, like just the vibe is different. Like, it's very corporate, the whole thing. Like, she was really kind of concerned about her image and making sure that, like, the people that gave her this funding were happy. So automatically you have a red flag. That interview was super awkward because she's sitting there and she's just kind of going with the flow, right? Like, she doesn't seem to be speaking from her heart. Like, there seems to be like a different like Issa going on. And of course, like, all her worries, all her sort of nightmares come true when she realizes her artist pretty much went against everything they had talked about. So Issa had kind of made a deal with the startup company that, okay, we'll take your notes and we'll kind of tone down our show. But unfortunately, you know, the designer had other plans. And this conversation between Crenshaw and Issa was just spectacular because Issa was really like, you could see the desperation in her voice, right? Because this designer was like, listen, I'm gonna do me. At the end of the day, like, I'm not gonna put anything out there that I don't want. And so either you're with it or you're not, but it is what it is, right? And she kept using this language of corporate, like, we have people to answer to, we're in this together. And he kind of looks at her and says, girl, you have people to answer to. I'm not a sellout. I don't, like, how you're measuring success and how I'm measuring success are two different things. And the bulk of the issue is that Issa does not want to go back to being a Lyft driver, right? Like, in her mind, she wants to accelerate success, right? She wants to get to wherever it is she's supposed to get to faster. And she kind of lost sight of what that looked like. And these designers and these people, like, this is her network. And she totally kind of dismissed them to make these other people happy. And watching her kind of like basically project onto other people is really interesting because she totally lost her groove. She lost her gut instinct. She was not seeing clearly. And it was just really something to see. Of course, the irony of the whole thing is that the event goes off and it's wonderful, right? Like, all the decisions that her designer made, like, to keep everything that he wanted and not take the notes was a fantastic decision. The people that she was most worried about ended up loving her and giving her credit for kind of going against the grain. And it's really interesting because I think one of the managers from the startup came up to her and said, thank you so much for going with your gut instinct. You know, we couldn't have been more wrong. Like, thank you for not taking our notes. And she's looking at him like, yeah. And at face value, like, everything is spectacular, right? Like, it goes off without a hitch. You know, Issa looks like the expert. She looks everything looks great. But, you know, beneath the surface is kind of a disaster, right? And I think Issa is so worried about what it looked like looking successful, that she totally forgot about that sort of like quiet victory, right? That thing, there's no better feeling than knowing that you did your best, even if nobody else sees it. Like, there's this kind of internal satisfaction, right? So yeah, maybe she got the external validation she was looking for, but she probably lost a very important connection. And it seems like she doesn't really know where to go from here. She's kind of depressed. She feels kind of sad. So she calls Nathan. And her relationship with Nathan, at first, I wasn't really sure what this was about. You know, like, at face value, again, it looked like she was ready to start fresh. She was ready to start new. But there was this kind of like weird energy to her, especially watching her at work, because so much was pinned on this. And the interesting thing is she kind of confessed to him like, hey, this didn't go as well as I thought I would. And he's like, girl, as long as it went well, that's fine. And one of the most brilliant scenes is when they're trying to make love and she literally cries in his mouth. Like, I died. I was like, that is something I would do. Like, she can't even pretend to be happy, right? Like, she just wants a shoulder to cry on. She doesn't know where to go from here. She feels like a sellout, you know, like, it was not worth it. You know, ultimately it was not worth it. And that's what kills her, right? Like, it'd be one thing if it was a total disaster and they hated it, but the fact that she ended up taking credit for something that she would have done anyways, I think just added a certain like layer of depression onto the whole thing. And it was just really sad to watch. Like, so Issa is in that weird place where she doesn't really know what to do. And I like the contrast in the end with Molly kind of starting fresh, right? So she's dating with intention. She's ready. She's very aware of herself. You know what I mean? Like, watching Issa and Molly at the end kind of like be on two completely different sides of the spectrum was really fascinating. So overall, I thought this episode was great. There were so many funny moments and clever dialogue. Like there was a scene at the start where she was throwing a block party or something, or like a community event, and one person comes up to her and she's like, I come to all your events, and she's looking at her like, get out, you know what I mean? Like the sunken place. Like there's so many clever little things that were being written all over the place. And yeah, I thought it was a great episode, and you guys let me know what you think, and it's